Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello and welcome to our Monday night Truth and Liberty live cast. I'm Andrew Wommack. I've got Pastor Mark Cowart here with me. He's one of our main guys here at Truth and Liberty, and Richard Harris isn't with us tonight, and so Mark and I are going to stumble through these introductory things.
It may be entertaining tonight.
Yeah, so give us some mercy. But we also have Bill Federer with us, and I tell you, Bill is just one of my favorite people. He puts out, I mention this every time, and I know he's got, I saw 22 books listed in this thing, and you've got more than that, don't you?
Right. We just came out with a new one, too. It's called Miraculous Milestones. It's advances in science, medicine, and innovation in the faith of those that made them.
And anyway, Bill, along with Lance Wallnow and David Barton, is on our board of directors here for Truth and Liberty. And I tell you, this man has forgotten more about world history than I've ever known. It's unbelievable. He's just like a computer. So we're going to have a great time, and he's going to help us put things into perspective tonight. So it'll be real good. But we need to encourage you to participate. And we do have people standing by at our phones. They're at 719-635-1111. And we're now open 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, and 10 hours a day on Saturday and Sunday. And you can call, you can get prayer, you can get questions answered in case we don't announce something correctly. But anyway, we encourage you to do that. And also, you can participate. How do you have it down how they?
Well, if they have questions tonight, they can post their comments in the live chat at truthandliberty.net/live, or leave your questions in the comment section on Facebook. You might get yours answered tonight.
And also, we give away a book every week, and last week we gave away my book entitled A Sure Foundation, and the winner of that was Rodney Breeden. And so we'll be shipping that out. And tonight, Bill has offered to give away his new book, and he just signed it for us. So that'll be a blessing. So what is this about again? Miraculous Milestones.
In science, medicine, and innovation. And so it was Christians that invented hospitals. All the way back to Constantine in the 3rd century had every cathedral where they took pilgrimages to have an infirmary, right? People would show up sick. So the word hosp means traveler. And so then the bubonic plague in Europe, and you had Catholic nuns that started the Hotel Dieu, the first hospital in Paris, and then they started hundreds of those all across Europe. But here it's interesting, they're wanting to tell Christians, put away your morality and do the abortions and do the sex change operations, and Christian doctors and nurses are like, we don't want to do this. Well, it's Christian morality that gave birth to hospitals.
Yeah, and like the Hippocratic Oath, it used to be that you'll do harm to no one. And now they've quit doing that because of abortions, I guess. Doctors don't take that anymore, do they?
No, they've switched it up. But it also has where our calendar came from, right? AD, BC, has all the different famous astronomers and their statements of faith. It's just a fascinating book, great for the student on college campus and their challenges defending their faith.
So anyway, we'll be giving this away, and if you want to enter that, you just go to our website and sign up. Do you know exactly how they do
Well, I'll look
anyway,
right.
If you'll go to our website, I'm sure that there's something self-explanatory, and those that sign up on the website, we just pick a name. And that's how we do this.
It says to be eligible for the gift, go to truthandliberty.net/subscribe, and I believe that puts them in there.
So if Richard Harris is watching tonight, this shows you that, man, we really appreciate you, Richard, because neither one of us know what we're doing. Also, let me mention that we would love for you to become a partner with Truth and Liberty. You know, we've had up to 80,000 people watch this. Plus, CTN carries this on their network. I don't think every one of the stations, but some of the stations on the CTN network. So there are tens of thousands of people watching this, and it costs money for us to do this. Plus, our website is awesome. If you go to truthandliberty.net, I tell you, that is a great resource. And we don't do everything ourselves, but we will link you to all of these other places. So there's just a wealth of information. We got all kinds of new posts that we put on there.
And you know, Andrew, that is not a tax-deductible gift, but you know, people that have a heart and a passion for this, if they'll sow into this, I'm telling you, the Lord will bless them in more ways than they can imagine. And that's what I appreciate about you all, is it's not just about us. When you see a work such as Bill Federer and things like that, we connect to people like that have incredible resources.
Matter of fact, if you go to our Truth and Liberty, we've got all of Bill Federer's American Minutes on there, and I read those every day. I've been doing that for years. I've learned a lot about history. There's a lot more I need to know. But we encourage you to become a partner, and the way you do that is we ask for an automatic withdrawal. There's a place on our Truth and Liberty website where you can go and do an automatic withdrawal of at least $5 a month. And we have a lot of people now doing that, and we subsidized it, I think, for the first year, but now we're actually turning a profit, and we're beginning. Matter of fact, we've got a meeting tomorrow to figure out how we can branch out and do some more things to flip not only Colorado, but just start making a difference in our nation. So anyway, those are good. Is there anything I missed, Mark?
Well, I think you did a great job.
Let's see, we do have some meetings coming up. Let me announce those. We've got our Orlando Gospel Truth seminar coming up on February the 11th through the 13th. And I've got Jeremy Pearsons is going to be there with me. That'll be in Orlando, Florida. And then we have a Truth and Liberty live on Sunday, February the 14th, and that's in Naples, Florida. And we have something special happening for our Army members. I don't think we're advertising that. That's just a special meeting with them. We got our Charis Men's Advance coming up, and that's with J.B. and Tony Dungy. I tell you, these guys are seen by over, I think it's 50 million people a week watch them, and they just love them.
And you know, J.B. Brown, I mean, he is not just a big name in sports, casting and things like that. He is such a man of God.
Oh, he's awesome.
And has some of the most anointed word to share. Two men that really love God.
You know, I really didn't expect them to have the depth of maturity that they do. But I tell you what, J.B. and Tony both have preached some of the best messages I've heard.
Absolutely.
And they put it into a sports context that reaches a lot of men. So you ladies that are watching, you know, if you have husband or sons or people you know that love sports, man, you can draw them in by these big names, but when they come, they'll hear the gospel. It'll be good. We've also got God With Us coming up. That's a musical that we put on April the 2nd through the 4th. And then our campus days where you come and experience what Charis Bible College is all about is April the 7th through the 9th. And you'll have some lunch with us. You'll get to meet all of the instructors and stuff. And it's just a great, great time. Also, let me say that we went to battle with the state. We won. They have removed all restrictions. So now we are having all of our meetings. There's zero restrictions on how many people we can have come. So don't worry about the COVID stuff. Come and praise God. We're going to have a great time and be well at the same time. Awesome.
Amen.
So, Bill, it's a real honor. As I said, you're on our board, and you and David Barton have just been a resource for me as I'm trying to launch into becoming more involved in what's happening in our society. You guys are two of the greatest resources that we've had. And so you have all of this information, and every time I'm around you, you put it into a perspective that gives encouragement, because this isn't the first time we've ever had a problem in our nation.
No,
it's not the first time in history. It goes one of these goes all the way back to Plato talking about these things.
Right. It's called Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present. And the subtitle is How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control. But I thought I would talk about two concepts. One is called psychological projection, and the other is psychological operation. So psychological projection, what's that? Sigmund Freud coined the term. That's where rude people call everyone they don't like rude. You deny in yourself a negative quality, but project that quality onto the other person. And so this is what Adam did to God. The woman you gave me, right? And little kids do this. I didn't start the fight, you did it. Cheating spouses do this. I'm not the unfaithful one, you are. And Sharia men that will rape a woman say it's your fault because you tempted me. So it's blame shifting where the attacker blames the victim. So it's gotten into politics. David Axelrod was the campaign manager for President Obama, and he was on NPR radio 2014, and he said, in Chicago politics, we have a tradition where you throw a brick through your own campaign office window and then call a press conference to accuse your opponent. So if there's a candidate that's colluding with Russia, maybe giving away a fifth of the U.S. uranium in exchange for a $145 million Russian contribution to her Clinton Foundation, she wants to pay for a Steele dossier to accuse her opponent of colluding with Russia.
Are you accusing her?
Oh, I'm telling this is the actual facts.
Whether
right?
you do or not, I will. I'm saying
so,
I believe that's exactly what happened.
And so what happens is the innocent person gets their name associated with the crime in the media over and over and over again, and people make a subconscious connection. And if the finger is ever pointed back at the guilty person, by that time the water is muddied and the public doesn't know who to trust, and she gets a pass. If there's another candidate that's extorting Ukraine, saying, stop investigating my son or I'll hold back American money, well, you want to accuse your opponent of extorting Ukraine. You accuse them of the exact crime that you're guilty of. That's why their name gets associated. They have to go on the defensive, and if it ever gets pointed back at you, by that time the water's muddied and you get a pass. So this is used every single day, where they accuse you of being hateful, where they're the actual hateful ones. They accuse you of being intolerant when they're the intolerant ones. But it's actually gone another step higher, where they'll do violence and accuse you of the violence. So if prior to January 6th, if I were to say, what political party is most associated with attacking capitals around the country? You don't have to guess, they're on tape, right? You know, there's Maxine Waters and others saying, go out there and have violence in the streets and things like that. Prior to January 6th, if I were to say, describe a Trump rally, people would say, well, there's families showing up and everybody's happy, and they pick up the trash afterwards. So what happened on January 6th is totally out of character for Trump supporters, and it's totally in character for the Antifa BLM type. And so what we see is that the reports have come out that there were Antifa people who infiltrated the rally. And I did an interview with Curtis Bowers, who's a former Idaho state representative, and he said he showed up at the Capitol with his son, was there at the rally, and he noticed that there was suspicious that there was no security around the Capitol. He says, I've been there before. You step off the sidewalk onto the grass, the police will yell at you. And he says it was eerie that there wasn't any security, and then the doors opened from the inside and they were waving people in. And some naive Trump supporters thought they were giving a free tour of the Capitol, and they just naively wander in there. And then when the violence occurred, they did not arrest anybody on the spot. They let everybody go and said, we'll follow up. Very strange behavior. And anyway, so a little background. Dressing up as supporters when you're not. I mean, we even had the Boston Tea Party, right, where they dressed up as Indians. So dressing up is not anything new. 1788. The King of Sweden, Gustav III, wanted to invade Russia, but his parliament would not approve funding. So he had the tailor of the Swedish orchestra sew Russian uniforms, and he had some Swedish soldiers put on the Russian uniforms and attack a Swedish outpost. And the media picks it up and runs with it that the Russians attacked. And it fans it into a flame, and when the parliament hears about this, all the pressure, they just cave and go ahead and vote to fund the war with Russia.
I'm sure you would know all the details, but didn't Hitler do the same stuff?
Right, and so it was 1930s, the Nazis wanted to invade Poland, and world opinion would not go along with it. And so it's called Operation Himmler, the Gleiwitz incident. So they had Nazi soldiers dress up as Polish soldiers and attack a German town. And the media picks it up, fans it into a flame. The Polish had attacked, and now the Nazis have a justification to go in and kill all take over Poland. You know, it's interesting. Saul Alinsky, community organizer. Hillary Clinton did her senior thesis at Wellesley College on Saul Alinsky, and President Obama was a Saul Alinsky organizer in Chicago. In the 1960s and 70s, he was talking to students, and some students said that they were going to disrupt a speech that then Representative to the United Nations, George H.W. Bush, was going to defend Nixon's Vietnam War policies. And these students told Alinsky they were going to try to disrupt the speech. And he said, no, go to the speech dressed as KKK members. And whenever Bush says something supporting Vietnam, hold up placards saying the KKK supports Bush. And he says the students did this and they had a tremendous effect. And so the idea of the left dressing up as faux supporters, fake supporters, but the purpose is to disrupt, is a standard policy. And so I wanted to, so they do the disruption, but they want to accuse you of it. They want to project that blame onto, and so Stalin did the same thing. So 1934, Stalin has an anti-Stalinist movement that's gaining momentum, and he's trying to figure out how to get rid of it. At the same time, Stalin has a friend, Sergei Kirov, who's the party boss of Leningrad, and he's giving speeches praising Stalin. He's so popular, they built a statue to him. And so Stalin came up with an idea. He would assassinate his friend, Sergei Kirov, and blame it on the anti-Stalinists. Nobody would suspect Stalin of killing his friend because they were buddies, and everybody would believe that the anti-Stalinists did it. And so did the assassination, blamed the anti-Stalinists, and he started this campaign, not just to censor or deplatform or cancel culture, but to arrest and kill over 1 million people. So this idea of they do the violent crime, and they blame not just Trump, but all the Trump supporters, and they'll just let this thing go like a snowball. The more that people cave, the bigger this gets, and the easier it'll crush other people. And it's like blood in the water to a shark. And so it takes the ability to stand up and say, we're not going to bend. And the only way you can do this is to expose projection. When they say you're hateful, you have to say, no, you're projecting your hate on me. Well, you Christians are intolerant. No, you're intolerant, and you're projecting your intolerance on us Christians.
So when you have the news media that is 100% behind all of this stuff and reporting this, how do we stop this? How do we change it?
Well, first of all, call it out and begin to educate ourselves on this issue. And I've done interviews where there'll be somebody else on there, and I'll actually beat them to the punch, where I'll say something and I'll say, well, I feel like you're intolerant of my viewpoint. I feel like, are you being hateful of me?
Yeah.
Are you being, and all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, that's what I was about to call you, right? And but it's a tactic that's used every single day in the media. And the thing is, if you cave to it, you can never cave enough.
Yeah.
You got to back up some more. Well, really, I'll tolerate more. I'll tolerate more till pretty soon there's nothing left. You don't believe anything. You've just given up. So that's a tactic that is called psychological projection. It's used every day. One other incident that's worth noting is 1955. Istanbul, Turkey, had a remnant of a Greek Orthodox population. And the Sharia fundamentalists that were in power wanted to get rid of them. So they planned to blow up the home of Ataturk. He was the founder of the Turkish Republic, and the home was in Greece. The home never got blown up, but the news media, the fake news, ran with it anyway and had the headlines, and that they blamed these Greeks for blowing up the home of Ataturk, and they looted, pillaged, smashed windows, and destroyed 80 ancient churches, pulled these Orthodox priests out of their beds and ripped off their beards. And sure enough, the remnant of the Greek population left. So you create the crises, blame it on the innocent victims, and you use that to rile up the media to push this narrative that you can go after them with. That's the tactic that's being used today. that we need to pull away the curtain like the Wizard of Oz and say, this is really what's happening?
You know, I'm not sure this is the same thing, but we had one of our Charis Bible College graduates that participated in going into the Capitol. And so the local news here was bombarding us, and I was away at a meeting, but they were contacting me and saying, how do we respond to this? And I said, don't respond at all. I said, we aren't responsible for that. And I said, if we respond and start trying to explain and do all of this stuff, I said, we are in a sense empowering their thing. So I said, just turn to them and say, are you responsible for every person that works for your news agency and what they do? And so I think it's a similar type of thing. They were trying to project me as being guilty, and if I'd have been on the defensive, it in a sense would have empowered them. And I just disassociated myself and said, I'm not responsible for what a person who graduated 10 years ago does today.
This is such a classic tactic. Germany was a republic in the 1920s, the Weimar Republic, and they had somebody started a political party named the National Socialist Workers' Party. The head of it was Adolf Hitler, and he had a violent arm to it, right? Sort of an Antifa BLM type arm. It was called brown shirts. They were nicknamed Sturmabteilung, which means stormtroopers, because they would storm into the meetings of Hitler's opponents and shout down the speakers and disrupt the meeting. And then these brown shirts would lock arms and block access to buildings. Could you imagine people locking arms and blocking things? And then they blocked streets. And then they went into the cities in Germany and smashed over 7,000 windows of Jewish stores, looted them, set them on fire in the night of broken glass, Kristallnacht. And then their capital got attacked and set on fire. And in this confusion, started by Hitler's brown shirts, Hitler seizes power, accuses his political opponents, has them deplatformed, censored, canceled, arrested, and shot without a trial. And when the dust settled, Hitler didn't have any political opponents, right? This tactic is used over and over again. It's just been perfected. We're just seeing it being used on our own soil.
I don't know how to counter this if people aren't aware of what's happening. They listen to the news and believe it.
I think we're seeing the absolute necessity of freedom of the press. And what we've seen is big tech and all these people censoring and what have you. Because everything you're saying, you know, with different YouTube things that didn't get pulled and Facebook, I saw so many reports of people saying, hey, what happened in January 6th is just what you described, because I've been to that Capitol, and I'm telling you, you're right, you don't get on the grass without getting corrected. And all these people had video where the police were ushering the people in. And so the freedom of the press, but really, Bill, what you're describing is right there in Romans chapter 2, says that you're inexcusable, whoever you are that judges, because when you judge another, you're really guilty of the same. It's really nothing new under the sun, what we're seeing going on in America right now.
And then the timing of it is suspect. That disruption in the Capitol happened at the exact time that they were bringing up the voter fraud allegations. The exact time that they were giving speeches saying, wait a second. And you look at the numbers, 75 million people voted for Trump. That's more than voted for President Obama at his height. He only got 69 million. That's more than voted for Hillary Clinton. She only got 65 million. And I haven't met anybody that thinks that Biden is more popular than Obama. And so supposedly Biden got 80 million votes. That's more than Obama got?
And Trump said that he got 11 million more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. That's a huge increase.
Yeah, and they all came in after 8 o'clock at night. So there's a lot of legit, so out of the 75 million that voted for Trump, 75% of those think that there was voter fraud. This is a massive amount of people in the country that think this. And so these are things that the other side doesn't want to bring up. Now, there's another tactic. It's called psychological operation. And this is the creating of a perception that everybody believes a certain way. And it has quite an interesting history. We're all familiar with World War II and the airplanes would fly over and drop pamphlets on the enemy that would say, your side has already lost, but your leaders aren't telling you that, and it would just confuse them. And another is Tokyo Rose. So the Japanese would have a sweet-sounding woman speaking in English, trying to confuse the American Navy and so forth. And so this idea of you want to confuse. Let's go back and see the idea of influencing a population. Wells Fargo wagon, Sears catalog. They would sell things by listing the attributes of the product. And then in the early 1900s, there was developed a marketing strategy where instead of listing the aspects of the product, you would just make it look like everyone was using it. And the classic is Crisco oil. Now, Crisco is made out of what?
Pig
Cottonseed.
Oh, I thought it was lard.
It's cotton seeds.
I don't know.
It put the lard business out of business. But nobody ate cottonseed oil. It was used in factories and in machinery. And so somebody came up with the idea of boiling it a bunch of different times and making it white. But they specifically did not list cottonseed oil on it. They made up a term, vegetable-based. They made that up, right? And so it was a total marketing campaign of ladies serving it, the nice dish to their families around a table, and they have the magazine pictures and the ladies using it in their kitchen. And it created this perception that everybody's using it, even though nobody knows what's in it. So this idea of how do you push something on a national level based on a perception that everybody's using it. Then you add in fear. So 1938 is the Orson Welles, an actor. He's doing a radio drama called War of the Worlds, and it was a sensation, right? We interrupt this program to announce that Martians have attacked New Jersey. And it spread across the country like wildfire, and everybody's running outside looking up in the sky for Martians. It was this phenomenon of fear. And so now it is studied how you can manipulate an entire mass of people, not just to buy Crisco oil in a product, but to motivate them fear-wise. This was studied by Joseph Goebbels. He was the propaganda minister for the Nazis. Imagine having a business card, propaganda minister. So he orchestrated these Colosseum events with 100,000 people, and at the beginning, in the front, they would start to give the Hitler salute. And then everybody else would see everybody else giving the Hitler salute, and they would give the Hitler salute, and everybody else would see you giving the Hitler. Till pretty soon it worked its way all the way back, and everybody would feel pressured to fit in with the group. It's sort of like in Islam where they would pray in a group, right? And they'd all bow, and it would take a lot of backbone to stand up and say, I'm not bowing, right? But it's this group pressure that's being used to push this fear and mobilize an entire nation to go along with something. This was studied after World War II in America. It's called the Solomon-Asch Conformity Experiment, done on college campuses, and they would pull 8 students into a room. 7 students had been paid ahead of time to be actors. 1 was a naive participant. And the teacher would put 2 cards on the front desk. 1 card simply had 1 line on it. The other card had 3 lines, 1 longer, 1 shorter, 1 the same. And beginning with the paid actors, one by one, they would stand up and convincingly say that the shorter line was equal to this first line. By the time it got around to that 8th naive participant, 30% of them would deny their own eyes to go along and fit in with the group. They so much wanted to, they would doubt their own perception. They would say, well, these people must know more than I do. And so this has now been used in classroom settings. They call it behavior modification. So forget academic achievement. They would just peer pressure kids, and the teacher would set what's acceptable, right? Sort of like the king would set the dress or the wig or the makeup, or the queen, everybody wants to dress like. So the authority figure, the imam, the whatever, sets the authority. So the teacher sets what's acceptable. And it's as easy as this. First day of class, the teacher says, who believes it's normal to have a mommy and a daddy? And little Johnny raises his hand. He goes, you're a hateful kid. You're a homophobe. You're a bigot. You're a terrible kid. You're the worst kid in the whole wide world. Then she stops and says, does anybody else believe what little Johnny does? Everybody's like, right? So Saul Alinsky says you pick a target, you freeze it, you isolate it, and you destroy it. And then everybody backs away, not just from them, but from everything they believe. So this concept was used in marketing. It's used in the Nazis studied, but then it's gone online. And so now everyone wants to be liked and friended and followed, and nobody wants to be unfriended and deplatformed, right? It's almost an online version of honor-shame culture. In the Asia and the Middle East, what brings honor to your family is good. What shames your family is bad. Sometimes they'll even kill their own daughter if she embarrasses them in front of their group, right? Their community. And so this is now a manipulated public opinion that's not real, but they're able to create this impression that the Google with their algorithms, you type in a candidate's name, it'll pull up all the negative articles on one candidate, all the positive articles on the other candidate, and the person doing the search wants to fit in with what everybody else is believing, and they'll say, oh, okay. And so this pressures them, and so we're seeing this being used today on a massive level in the media, in the internet, and in this public opinion arena.
Could you relate the COVID virus and stuff to all of this? Because I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of shame, and people are going by what everybody else is doing, not following logic.
Yeah, so it was a sort of like the Solomon Asch experiment, and Chuck Colson talked about it. It was one done with wine tasting. And so they had a room full of couples, and they would taste the wine, and everybody was in on this experiment except one naive couple. And they poured vinegar in the wine. And this couple writes, this tastes terrible. But all the other ones would stand up and say, this wine had character, this was robust, this was really good. By the time I got around to this naive couple, they had scratched out that it was terrible, and they agreed with the crowd. And then someone stood up and said, well, you know, all they did was pour vinegar in the wine. The couple that had changed their views criticized that person for saying that. And it's a phenomenon called false enforcement. Once somebody buys into the false view, they don't know what happened, but they finally cave to what the group says, they will enforce that everybody else go along with the group.
So is that happening?
Yes, yes. So this is what's called a psychological operation, or a psyops. And now, the little background on that. So World War II ends, and Germany, France, England give independence to their former colonies. And now it's a brand new world with new countries and new leaders, Romania and Czechoslovakia and Lithuania. And the KGB decides that it wants to take over these countries. So they would send KGB agents into these brand new countries and identify all the people groups and break them into victims and oppressors, haves and have-nots. Ethnically, right? Bosnian Serbs, Croats, religiously, Sunni, Shia, Orthodox, racially, economically, didn't matter. They would break them into these groups, and then they would have the victims stage protests, that they would escalate into riots, escalate into violence, cause the country to get into a panic, and then they would co-opt the media with bribes and threats to blame the current leader for all of the problems. And when they would nurture weak links in the military, and when the country got panicky enough, they would do a coup or a rigged election, replace the leader with a Soviet puppet, and the violence would suddenly subside for a while. But when the dust settled, everybody realized we just gave up our free country, and now we're underneath the thumb of the Soviet Union. So these tactics have been perfected. The president in America at this time was Truman. He does nothing. He thinks the United Nations that he helped form will bring world peace. But the next president is Eisenhower, and he's faced with 1953 Iran siding with the Soviet Union. The leader in Iran was Mossadegh, and Mossadegh decides he's going to nationalize the oil industry in Iran. And people say, well, big deal. Well, wait a second, Britain has no oil. And so in 1908, Britain formed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. You know it better as BP, right? British Petroleum is really the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And when Mossadegh nationalizes this, Britain has no oil. And so they appealed to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower approves the first CIA operation to overthrow a country's leader. It's Operation Ajax. The CIA operative on the ground is Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt. He's an expert in foreign languages, goes to Tehran. He does the same thing. He recruits mobsters and gangsters and radical imams. He stages protests and riots and attack mosques. They co-opt the media with bribes and threats to blame Mossadegh for all the problems. They find some weak links in the military. When the country gets panicky enough, they put Mossadegh under house arrest, lock him away for the rest of his life where he dies, and they replaced him with the Shah, who loved America because we put him in. And then the CIA did the same thing in Guatemala in 1954, the Congo 1960, Dominican Republic, even Chile. And the KGB did the same thing, with Brezhnev helping Yasser Arafat to start the PLO, and Brezhnev helping Castro to take over Cuba and FARC and so forth. And so, so these are tactics called the Cold War. So these Cold War tactics have been perfected, being used in other countries, but now we see them being used on our own soil.
You know, Washington warned against this. You would know the exact time and quotes and everything, but he basically said that if you ever use the power given to you, even if it accomplishes a good thing, you've unleashed something that will eventually turn against you. Well, you can't do that.
Yeah, and Bill, you have just encapsulated what we've watched unfold. This might be a good opportunity to insert. Questions are starting to come in, but
yeah,
this is a question I've got right here, because Wendy on Facebook said, how do Christians respond to this projection and blame shifting? What can we practically do on a daily basis?
Yeah, I would suggest calling them out on it. Now, it's not we've sort of gotten used to the idea that Christians just go along with anything, and we have to refresh ourselves and reread the Gospels and see that almost every other time Jesus talked, he had Pharisees and Sadducees trying to catch him in his words. His first public sermon ended with them wanting to push him off a cliff. Another sermon ended with them picking up rocks to stone him to death, right? I mean, he was somebody that was not afraid to call out injustice when he saw it. And so we need to refresh ourselves to the different aspects of Jesus, and not the fact that he just tolerated. To the humble, he was forgiving and open. To the prideful, he was tough.
But you know, if you're dealing with the person one-on-one and they're saying these things, well, then you can do that. But how do you deal with when it's on a national level and you've got these people with a platform that's reaching millions of people, and here you are, just an individual? How do you counter that? We don't have the same platform. Right. That is a difficult thing. I am pleased to see lots of new platforms coming on. There's the Truth and Liberty, but you've got Gab and Telegraph and Signal and Life.USA and these MeWe, different apps and replacements to Facebook and Twitter. And I would encourage people to begin to take advantage of those. From a political point of view, I would get away from computer voting. I spent 2 years with Phyllis Schlafly before she died, collecting all the stories of voter fraud from around the country, from all of her Eagle Forum members. And there's hundreds of different ways to do voter fraud, from having names of people that are dead still on the voter rolls, to having gone out with cash, paying people to take one of those names and go and vote with it, to, but with computer voting, it's like totally open. It is so easy to do computer voter fraud. The computers are hooked up to the internet. A certain company makes the modems, and there are companies based in other countries. Well, they have the codes to access the modem remotely, and then the companies that make the computer software, they can have date-sensitive fraud. So the day before the election, it works great. The day after works great, but the day of the election, it sorts it out to a predetermined percentage. They would have trapdoor programs where you'd punch a ballot in a way that nobody normally would, and once it gets read, it activates the code to sort it out to a predetermined percentage. There were even lawsuits where salesmen for these companies, and many of them are based in outside the United States, but the salesman would promise the little county executive that, hey, if you choose our machine over the other one, we'll promise you get reelected.
So I could talk a whole lot on that.
You've been a recipient of voter fraud. You ran for office when, 2000?
Right.
And so you saw some of this firsthand.
Right. I ran against Dick Cowart. He was the Nancy Pelosi before Nancy Pelosi. So he was the #1 Democrat in Congress. And on election night, Jefferson County, Missouri, Hillsborough, we were ahead on the computers, and all of a sudden the electricity goes off in the whole Board of Election, the building. And when it boots up again, we go from being ahead to behind.
That sounds like Trump's election.
And so when we had people call us, we hadn't heard of in decades, and they called us when in Georgia, they said, oh, the water main broke, and they had to get everybody out of the building. And then they find out it wasn't a water main break. Someone stuffed a urinal. They fixed it within an hour, but they just needed an excuse to get everybody out of the building. Right? We had my name left off the ballot in 5 wards in the city of St. Louis. People went in to vote for me. My name wasn't there. I mean, I stood in front of Guffey Elementary School for 8 hours on Election Day in the cold, shaking thousands of hands. It was the largest precinct polling place in the county. And that night at our victory party, I didn't win though, but we're watching the TV. And all of a sudden I get a phone call from one of our volunteers down at the Jefferson County Board of Election. They said they can't find the box of ballots from Guffey Elementary School. I'm like, what? I stood in front of that school for 8 hours. You're telling me that? And anyway, at the same time, my opponent gets on TV, announces he won. I mean, it happens, and it's for those that can say it doesn't happen, they are either totally naive or they're benefiting from it somehow.
So let me ask the question. I know we're bound to have a lot of others, but what do we do about this? This goes back to 2000, and I know that you were on just a few weeks ago with us, and you said Lyndon Johnson was a master at all of this. So this goes back decades. It seems to be systemic. How do we change this system?
I would, on a state-by-state level, go back to paper ballots. You think, oh, there's so many millions of ballots. Just count them on a precinct level and have it open to precinct judges from any party that wants to, and sit there all night if you need to. But everybody, all the Republican, Democrat, whatever other parties, you count them over and over again till you agree, you sign off on it, and then you tape the results to the window. Then you package up the ballots and send them to the board of the election, and they can be tallied up. But if you're running for office, you can drive around to all those little precincts, look at all the windows, and by golly, that better be the same number that they announced on TV that night. And do automatic audits and swap out the auditing companies. But paper ballots is the only way you can get around it. Now, you can still bribe election judges, but it goes back to more of a local bribing versus with the computerized stuff, you can have stuff in the other countries accessing our elections. So I would go back to paper ballots. And people sometimes get discouraged and say, well, we can't turn around. For them to work, so there's some areas where every single Republican won except Trump. Now, it makes no sense that somebody would be so Republican they'd vote for every one of them and then vote for Biden, right? So it would take them a while to work any fraud down to the local offices. I would tell every church to identify every elected office in your church area, school board, fire board, police board, and put a name on the ballot for every single seat. That's what the other side did, and they did it faithfully for 20 years, and they got into the system. Just run somebody. Maybe they can get in, maybe they can't get in. Once a month, there's the political parties have their meetings, right? The Democrats have a club, the Republicans have a club. Just say, have the church on that Thursday night of whatever week show up at the Republican club meeting. You take over the whole meeting.
Let me just say that Mark and I were in a meeting this last week, and we've got a meeting with David Barton, Bill Federer tomorrow, and we are starting to do some of these exact things. So we aren't just describing the problem, we are taking steps to fix it. We're premature to say anything tonight, but we're doing stuff.
And what this is all saying is we have to get involved. It's we the people. And I'm looking at your second volume, I believe there, Bill, of Miracles in American History. Now, last week we had David and Tim Barton, and I asked him this question. This is some of the most encouraging materials. They're short stories that I believe your wife put together, Susie, that just her favorite accounts. Can you think, because when you hear this stuff, people's hearts can be overwhelmed, be discouraged, say, what what good is it to even hope this will change? Can you think of any particular time or something that stands out? Because there were times in history that had God himself not intervened, we wouldn't be here, starting with our birth. Is there a particular story that stands out in your mind that would give us encouragement tonight with all of this stuff we've seen? Because I believe so many people are watching and they know something in here is telling them that all this stuff that's gone on, the election fraud and all these staged riots and all these kind of things, is there any particular story that stands out in your mind that would be an encouragement for the viewers?
Well, thanks for mentioning that, Mark. We have to remind ourselves the church was born into a one world anti-Christian government, the Roman Empire. Evidently, God's not concerned about Christians being in one world anti-Christian governments. The church not only survived, but won. And so this is the idea that history has gone on and on. Israel, for a long period of time, they were in charge of their own destiny. But there was a point when they sinned enough and God let them get taken away into Babylon. They were still God's people. They still ministered and they still grew, and then eventually God let them go back. It's just learning how. I'm reminded of when the missionaries were in China, right? So in the late 1800s, the missionaries went to China, and they were there all the way up until the Mao Zedong. And he did a cultural revolution where they not just drove out the missionaries, but they bulldozed the churches down and they dusted their hands and said, that's it, we took care of Christianity. But providentially, some of the church leaders said, no, the building's not the church, you're the church. And I remember one told the story of a lady going to a laundromat. First he said, it was Watchman Nee, was one of these Chinese pastors, and he said 5 things. Number 1, if we cannot, someday we may not be able to broadcast. Lord willing, we'll be able to continue to this, but in some countries like China and so forth, these freedoms are not there. But 5 things. Number 1, listen for people around you that have needs in the course of your day, right? Have the spiritual ear. If God just happens to have somebody cross your path and they have a need, so keep a spiritual ear. Number 2, do the best you can to meet that person's need. Number 3, become that person's friend. Continue to stay in touch with them. Number 4, introduce them to some of your other Christian friends. And finally, introduce them to your friend Jesus. So he tells the story, years ago I met Paul Yonggi Cho, the world's largest church there in Seoul, Korea. And anyway, it tells the story of a lady going to a laundromat, they live in those high-rise, and heard crying. Goes around the corner, it's a new pregnant mom, and she doesn't know how they're going to make it. So she brings a bag of groceries over to this new pregnant mom, their house, and helps her. And then she goes back every now and then and checks up on her. How are you doing? Then she gets some of her other Christian lady friends to go, and they check up on her, have a baby shower, and so forth. And finally, this girl says, why are you all being so nice to me? And they say, well, let us tell you about our friend Jesus. Now, that girl's not about to turn him into the communist authorities, because they were her friends in her time of need. And so with that model, the church exploded in growth behind the bamboo curtain. So what we may be entering into is a period where it's going to be a personal faith. It's going to be each Christian living out their faith in their own day-to-day, having a spiritual ear. It doesn't mean that you go out and necessarily pass out a tract to a stranger. But if the Lord has somebody cross your path and they have a need and you have a spiritual ear, you're like, okay, Lord, is this you? Do you, right? Then you do the best you can to meet the need, right? If you're a guy and there's, somebody that got a flat tire, you feel like you can help out. So, anyway.
I tried to help a guy that was broken down on the road today, just walking down the road and stuff. And, I believe you could prove and verify that during throughout history, that persecution and hardship actually causes the church to grow. Prosperity has been more damaging to the church than persecution ever
It's
was.
caused leanness of soul. And David Barton pointed out in the last 2 decades, we've had an explosion of mega churches, but in that same 2 decades, a decrease of professing Christians from 85 to 65%. And one of the things he said was, You know, we think bigger is better, but what you just described is true Christianity. So David told he had a meeting in Arizona and 6 people showed up. And somebody said, well, what'd that do to your ego? And he said, well, it didn't bother me. I ministered to those 6 people.
Yep,
and one
absolutely.
of those 6 people became a very effective state senator in the state of Arizona. And what you just described, another question that's come in, I think this is important too. How can parents make sure their kids are learning traditional American history? And I want to say this. I was going to say it a little bit earlier. Revisionism is not so much what they're trying to introduce. It's not what they're saying. It's what they don't say. The uniqueness of, for instance, you and David Barton, is there's some things left out about our Christian heritage. So how can parents make sure their kids are learning genuine, I guess we could say unedited American history?
Well, that is sort of the reason my wife wanted to put this book together, Miracles in American History. We got a volume 1 and a volume 2. There's stories in our country's past where there's a crisis, they pray and things turn around. And one of the things in this volume, we found out that revivals usually happen in times of crises. So you got the French and Indian War. Well, gee, at the exact same time is the First Great Awakening. And then you have the Revolutionary War, and then you got the circuit riding preachers, and then you have the Barbary Pirate War and a threatened war with France, and then you got the Second Great Awakening revival. So in times of crises, people turn to Christ, and it's in times of crises that God raises up leaders. You never would have heard of Moses, had it not been for the crisis with Pharaoh. Never would have heard of David, had it not been for the crisis with the Goliath. We never would have heard of George Washington, had it not been for the crisis with King George. He just would have been another gentleman Virginia farmer. Never would have heard of Lincoln, had it not been for the crisis of slavery. He just would have been an Illinois lawyer. The other thing we found is that it's always the preaching of the law before people see their need for the Lamb. Mm-hmm. And so the First Great Awakening is Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God. What's that all about? God is a just God, which means he has to judge every sin. If he doesn't judge the sin, his silence is effectively giving consent to the sin. Right? Silence gives consent. Remember a wedding ceremony and the pastor says, anyone that's against this wedding, speak now or forever hold your peace. If you're sitting there in the wedding silent, your silence is giving consent to the wedding. So if there's sins and God is not judging them, his silence is giving consent to sin. And if God gives consent to sin, he's no longer a just God. Right? He denies his just character. He denies himself. And God cannot deny himself. So he is going to judge every sin. The gospel is that Jesus took the judgment of our sin in our place, right? So once you realize, gee, it's one strike and you're out. All you got to do is sin one time and you can never go to heaven by being good enough. It's like, whoa, I'm in trouble. I need help. Okay, now I got your attention. Here's help, Jesus. He died on the cross to pay for your sin. And so we see that the preaching of the law, there was a 1857 layman's prayer revival. There was a financial collapse in New York, thousands of people out of work. One guy named Jeremiah Lamphere puts a sign out, says, come in at lunchtime and pray. Like one person comes in. But he does it, and the next week, 10 people. The next week, a dozen, hundreds, thousands, till pretty soon 20, 30,000 people in New York, Chicago, LA, all across the country. And it's a layman's, nobody's organizing. It's just a move of the Spirit. It's people saying, I'm going to get involved. And then there's, Billy Sunday was a famous baseball player at the height of his career. He decides to be an evangelist and pioneers radio broadcasting. And D.L. Moody was a shoe salesman. And there was an empty saloon in downtown Chicago. And he opens it up for kids to come in. And one person visited and said that D.L. Moody could hardly read the Bible himself. And he was holding up a black child and had the lamp and was struggling reading through the Bible. And he says, if God can use that guy, he can use anybody. D.L. Moody said it's the biggest lie of the devil to think that kids can't understand the gospel when God used a child to be the example of faith.
D.L. Moody actually had such a hard time reading that he would read until he got to a word he couldn't pronounce or didn't know what it was. And so he'd preach up to that point and then start on the other side of that word. I've heard that story. Before we quit, we're just about out of time. You need to tell them about your website and how they can get your materials.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. AmericanMinute.com. AmericanMinute.com, and I send out a daily history email that you can sign up for free and also have the different books and so forth.
And you got all of your books listed on there?
Right. This brand new one called miraculous milestones in science, medicine, and innovation in the faith of those who made them. It's great for witnessing to unbelievers and sort of with those that are on college campuses and in school.
And we're going to give this to one person that we choose. So go to our website and sign up, and we will pick a winner out of this. I think we got time for one more question.
We do. Curtis on chat here. Should Christians continue to vote in light of recent election irregularities?
Right, definitely. And again, look at all the local offices. So even if we didn't win the presidency for somebody that was pro-life, right? I voted for Trump. But even if we didn't win that, there's still lots of local elections that the fraud has not gotten down to, and you can make a difference there. I do think we need to transition to paper ballots, put pressure on congressmen to at least suggest that and bring it up as a bill. But have someone run for every single office. Whether you win or not, just put your name to run for a school board seat, to run for city council or whatever. And you can't hit a home run unless you come up to bat.
Yeah.
I heard somebody years ago, I think it was Terry Law, and he says, I bet the Lord used me to heal more people than anybody else in this room. And he says, you think I'm being boastful? He goes, no. He says, I just prayed for more people. He says, if you're sitting there, you're not praying for anybody. God's not going to use you. Put your hand on them and say a prayer. And he says, you'll start seeing stuff. But it's like you just put your name on the ballot. Get out there and do something, and then let God do his half.
I agree. We need to get involved on the local level. But at the same time, there are some people who are trying to get some some things changed in the voting system. And so we need to pray about that and deal with all that voter fraud too. We got a minute and 40 seconds. Got one more question?
Let's see.
You weren't.
How should Christians respond? This is Linda on YouTube. How should Christians respond to the growing influence of socialism?
Expose it. That's what I did in this book. Socialism is the cultural bait and switch. Imagine if older fish could tell younger fish to stay away from sparkly things in the water. But they can't. So every new generation of little fishes see that sparkling little fishing lure up there and goes up and bite it. Socialism is a sparkly thing in the water. It's free food, free clothes, free education, free wealth. Free is attractive, right? But there's a hook in there. There's a great quote from Gerald Ford. He says, the government that's big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take away everything you have.
Amen. Well, we're just about out of time. Again, we want to thank CTN for carrying this on their network. And we do this every Monday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And we have on some of the greatest guests. If you don't know Bill Federer, if you hadn't been to his website, if you don't get that American Minute, please sign up for it. I think it's a free deal, isn't it?
Right, right.
It's sent out to you by email, and I promise you, you will be blessed. So thanks to Pastor Mark for filling in, and Richard Harris, man, we missed you tonight.
Yes, we did. I bet he'll be sure to be here
next
week.
We'll have you back next week. But God bless you. We are going to be back next Monday, and I encourage you to please participate in the political process. That's what Truth and Liberty is all about. Go to truthandliberty.com or .net and check us out. We'll see you again next Monday. God bless you.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net.